Hey guys, it's Mike from Shamino's workshop. Today I'll have two videos. I'll show the Satele Shan saber from Korbanth, which is installed, and in the second video I'll showcase the chassis and which I have up on my Etsy store now, just to break it down, show how it's installed, how it's used. And how it can be used in both the in-hilt and, in both the single hilt or staff mode. So this video will just kind of showcase the saber, the installed saber itself. You get it, you get in the Korbanth box, you get it as a kit, not as a kit, but you get it as two separate hilts. In single hilt mode, you get vented pommel cap. You get two of these, and then to put it in staff mode, you also get a single coupler, and you get tools. There's a lot of screws on this hilt, but essentially they're all two sizes, so they give you two tools. So the way that I've installed this, I've installed it using the NeoPixel or the Pixel Switch PCB, because as you can see, these are your switches up here, and then each hilt has a set of switches. I made power the larger button on top and auxiliary the smaller button. So I designed it so that there's sort of a PCB connector right here, just below the switch, and that'll stay inside the hilt, secured by a set screw that's basically right here that you can't see. So that piece stays with a blade side PCB connector here, and then the remainder is a removable sled chassis. So that's kind of what this looks like. So this is that PCB holder. The PCB would go there, and it kind of sits right about here. This is just kind of like a wire channel, and then you have your main sled, which has a speaker, 28 mil speaker, 18650 battery, Proffieboard, kill switch, and then sort of that hilt side PCB connector, and that would kind of sit like that. And then while it's in staff mode, you can see you have your sound venting. So I just kind of created a spacer trying to match those vent holes. And what that does is, keeps the chassis sleds, from because they're sort of under tension, keeps it from falling out and keeps it in place. Okay, so the kit also comes, you get a blade plug up here. Well, let's fire it up first. I have 3 fonts installed, so you can see you got some nice shine through up here. But I have 3 fonts installed. Let me think this through. I have an old Satele font from Link, which doesn't seem to be working very well. No fault to Link. It's an older Plector style font, and I'm not sure. I think I ran into the same issue when I installed the Bastila font saber. I have to look at Serial Monitor and refresh my memory, but I think it was either a poorly named font file or I don't know, but something with the font that Proffie didn't like that I had to address. So I'm having the same issue here. So there's the Satele font, there's the Grand Legacy, I think, from Fourzze, which is a smooth swing font, and then Jesse's For some reason, Legacy is coming to my mind, but I forget the name. But Jesse had, or Kyberphonic had released a whole bunch of, you know, Knights of the Old Republic for a while, and Satele was one of them. So unlike the Bastille install, where I had either separate single hook chassis and then a staff mode chassis, that worked really well because of the large coupler in the middle with that nice vented coupler, and could kind of make for a nice crystal reveal. I didn't do that with this one. I just went for just two chassis that, you know, can just be used in a staff mode, with the idea that, you know, one side could be sort of reprogrammed, like the fonts, to maybe remove the redundant force, or not force, but maybe boot up sounds or font sounds, so that, you know, one side would deal with the quotes and things like that, and the other side would just be blade ignition. Yeah. You know, so you have... See, I think this is the broken font, right? Because I switched to it, and you're not hearing anything. It's booting up, and it's just you're not hearing sound. So that's usually an indication that Proffie doesn't like the font files.
I sense a great darkness.
And that's what I mean, right? In this type of setup, we have, you know, we have the dual font or the dual boot. It's too redundant, right? So eventually I'll mess around with making one half just sort of effects, and the other half, you know, you know, all the sounds.
Nothing prepared me to face that enemy. Nothing prepared me to face that enemy.
And, you know, I'm using Fernando or Fett's blade styles. So what you're seeing here,
I sense a great darkness.
You know, that's giving me sort of battery indication. So I don't know, maybe it's 5 seconds. It'll shine green or yellow or red or blue. You know, it'll give me a visual indication of what my battery level looks like.
It is not my time to die.
I like that startup.
I sense it is not my time to die.
So then let's take one of these blade plugs out. So the blade plug is the smaller of the screws, so use a smaller tool. So this is nice because you get your blade top, your little muffin top, which is metal and weathered, and then I'm assuming this is some sort of cast resin or an epoxy, you know, like some sort of resin that's been threaded, or what's the opposite of tapped? A die. Well, so this is, I guess, a die side would create the threads, and then tap side over here would create the opposite threads. So, you know, this is really nice. It's got good blade depth, but it didn't account well for the fact that we'll have a you know, NeoPixel PCB up in the emitter. So without that PCB, which is 10 mil tall, the blade plug sits inside of the emitter. And so what I mean by that, right, if I put this in now, see how it, you know, it shows itself. Without the PCB holder, if you put it in, it recesses itself way down. You know, so you, and I'm not going to damage this, but, you know, the nice thing is you could always maybe replace this with a shorter version, or cut the bottom if you really wanted to. Maybe even cut this in half. Because, you know, I think the idea was to fill in this entire, because you have these shine-through vents, right? So you probably want to ensure that whatever you're using to hold your blade plug is covering all of that. Okay. 1 inch. If I remember right, these are 1 inch blade sockets, so they take 1 inch blades. Sorry, I don't have my blade here, but you guys know how my blades work. Let's see what else. Yeah, so let's break down the center. So this is, you know, this is the drawback where, like on the Bastille or Bastilla, it's just screwed, right? Which are very long threads, takes kind of forever to undo. Here you have screws holding the coupler on, as well as the pommels in the single hilt mode. So getting to the internals is a bit more work than normal. So I would and in fact I might not. Maybe I'll use this instead. Maybe it'll go quicker. Maybe I had the right size to begin with. Yep. So there's 3 screws on each side. Getting them lined up was a little bit of a chore, but so here you can see your speaker. Now in single hilt mode, there's sort of an indentation here. That's holding the speaker and the chassis sled in place, but the coupler doesn't have that. That's why we needed this other piece inside to keep the sleds in place. Yeah, so a little palm slap. And so, you know, we have kill switch, we have the speaker. Now the speaker, it's almost exactly 28 mil inner diameter. My calipers actually say 27.9. So, you know, I undersized this a little bit. But the speaker, the outer ring, is usually exactly 28. So trying to get 28 mil in exactly 28 mil, or even worse in 27.9, doesn't work, right? So if you want your 28 mil bass speaker, you have to, you know, I use a Dremel drum wheel, and I just sand down this edge just to make it flush with the chassis, and then you'll get nice and smooth. The other thing I do also is just like a Scotch Brite pad, and I just, you know, I sand down the chassis just to make it really nice and smooth. And this way you get good action when you slide it in. I try to also design my chassis so they're press fit, but I also provide where you could put some crafter's tape to hold the Proffie in place, but really shouldn't need to. So 28 mil bass speaker, 18650 battery. These decals are just something I buy from an Etsy store located in the UK, and I'm trying to arrange so that maybe I could buy these in bulk and also sell them on my Etsy store here in the States. But these look great. You know, they really kind of dress it up. Proffieboard 1.5 or 2.2. You know, I leave enough space so that you get access. I don't have my plastic tool to lift this up, but don't ever lift it up by the USB port. This can come off, especially with these press fits. So usually I just get like a plastic or a wooden tool and just poke up the front, and then you can get access to the SD card and USB slot. This is the Switch PCB, right? So that's going to allow the 3 connections for the NeoPixel, and then the 3 connections for 2 switches. And then of course your kill switch. I've delayed the boot up sound just so that I could get it seated and But in this case, you have a speaker on board. So the boot up's not necessary, really not necessary, but I put a 10-second delay because that gives me enough time.
I've waited for you a long time.
That gives me enough time to slide it in, get the pommel cap on, and start to screw it on while I hear the boot up sound. Okay. I won't break down the other one. They're identical. But what I will show you, and I have to say, Korbanth's maker of this hilt, I really feel did an excellent job. This etching is beautiful. The weathering, there's also some sort of perhaps some sealant that's protecting the painting and the weathering. And if you look at the game, photos of this hilt, I mean it's really spot on. The other thing I'll warn you, inside of these three pieces is a small spring that's just providing that tension back. So when you take this apart, because you have to take, and I'll do it, I'll show you, you have to take these three screws off, and then when you lift this up, that spring is going to provide tension, and mine all fell out. I didn't know they were there. I wasn't paying attention, and I undid them, and then the springs went everywhere. I was luckily able to find them. So heed my warning there. So yeah, let me break this down. So you get these nice screws. So I'm using my thumb just to keep that in place while, so, you push it in place and do it over like a box, like the box, the kit that I'm doing this way. If it's going to fall, it fall in the box. But this piece comes apart. This is actually two pieces, and then the spring is inside there. Small little spring. And then this is just, threaded rod. So when you get this kit, it'll be assembled, and in order to access the switches, you'll have to take it apart to install it and assemble the switch, which is a nice little Switch PCB. So 3 screws, and then there's one final screw, which is where the Switch PCB gets installed. So you can just lift this up. These are, I feel like a rubber of some sort, maybe a silicone, but they're just little inserts that push down on the switches. So the kit comes with 2 of these PCB switches, and there's the blade side with the holder that is secured by a grub screw or retention screw. Pretty sure I used that one. I don't know what that hole was for, but very, very well thought out. Those are for the smaller holes, or for the screws, right, that we just took out. And then the larger hole is to retain. So, not only does it look beautiful, it was a very well thought out for installs. So the way that I did this, right, I took the PCB, which you cannot flip around, right? There is only one orientation, and so just make sure when you put the PCB in place that you line it up, and just make sure that your switches are lined up with the holes. If they're not lined up exactly right, you have to turn it around. But essentially, you'll see they're under this switch are the pads for soldering. There's 3 pads. That's how you'll orient it, right? Use the soldering pads for orientation, and the soldering pads will be on the bottom. But what I did was I just threw a little bit of double-sided tape on the underside of the PCB, because once it's wired and then you push this in, it's going to put pressure behind the PCB and push it up, which makes it a little difficult to have it seat. So, and I didn't want to use glue or an epoxy or anything like that. So a little double-sided tape, perfect. Because then once what you're gonna do is put that on. You'll put the, the switch plate and screw it in, and then it'll just be held in place. Yeah. So I'll, in the other video, I'll go into more depth on the install. But once it's in place, what I do is I throw this on top. Get this screw back on. Check for clicky. The aux doesn't click as well as this one. I don't know why that is, but you can hear the clicky. So you might want to do that just to check for the action. And now putting it back together, I put the spring in the hole. Seat the threaded rod and kind of hold it like that. Get the top in and then get it lined up, and then get your screw back in. Okay. And then, you do that. I'm just going to leave it like that, so in my second video I can, I'll maybe undo it and go into more in-depth on the chassis breakdown. But let me show you. I'll turn it on. Orientation doesn't matter, right? Because the switches are kind of locked in place with that upper PCB.
I've waited for you a long time.
So single hilt mode, right? You're just lining that up, dropping that in place, and locking it in. Don't go too crazy with the screws. Get them all in first, because you can see, right, there's a little bit of compression with those pogo pins, so the chassis is being forced downwards. So, use your finger to push the pommel cap in place, get the screw on. And these screws will, I didn't sand my screws. They do protrude a little bit into, so even the screws, can touch the chassis sled and hold it in place, but it's not necessary. Like I said, it's designed so that the cap is holding the sled in place. And these screws are pretty, they thread in pretty well. So, I wouldn't go crazy. Um, 4.04 volts. So that's it. So I'll leave it like that for now. And so in the second video, I'll go into a little more depth give some tips on how to install the chassis, or at least what I do to install the chassis. Yeah, so excited for you guys to get this. I know Korbanth, I believe, should be getting the remainder of stock by the end of the month and getting them shipped out. So for those that have bought it, keep on the lookout. It should be there soon. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching.